today who works in accessibility and disability inclusion, Cam Beaudoin. And do you say the I? Do you
Yeah.
say do you say the N in the last name?
Yeah. I usually try and get people to think of the word Baldwin, right? If you can say Baldwin, you can say Beaudoin.
Oh,
And that's close enough for anyone who's non-French speaker. So that's good.
yeah, like me. Yeah, about Beaudoin. Yeah, it's like a very smooth last name.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, so I'm really happy you're here with me this morning, Cameron. I'll just do a quick introduction. So Cam's career in accessibility started when he was told to fix 6,000 accessibility defects his first day on the job. Since then, he's developed his expertise in accessibility and become an advocate and public speaker, helping to change the conversation around disability inclusion. Cam has a LinkedIn live show every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time where he talks with guests about disability, and accessibility best practices. And I have here links on where you can find Cam. So, Cam, thank you so much for joining me this morning. How are you doing?
Oh, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate, I see you on my show every week, I think, and it's great. And this is a sneak peek to what the new studio down here looks like. I've been moved from my regular office down to the basement because my wife and I are expecting, so we're converting the office into a new baby room, and I've got the basement from now. So I got to convert it into a little bit of an office.
Oh, yeah, it looks very nice. You've converted it. You've done a
Yeah.
good job there. So yeah, your LinkedIn Live shows really one of my favorite LinkedIn Lives. There's so much information, and I just feel like we could talk for hours and hours with different guests about accessibility. And there's still so much new information out there. Like just today, I just learned a new term, dynamic disabilities.
Mm.
Dynamic disabilities. Have you heard of that?
Never heard of dynamic disabilities. What's that?
Yeah. Yeah, if someone has fluctuations in chronic illness, maybe something like multiple MS,
Okay.
multiple sclerosis, and it's just fluctuating, but you still have a disability.
Mm,
So, no, and somebody said it's been around since 2019,
got
maybe
it.
longer. So, that was always new information out there. So,
Yeah, well, that's also why I love this industry too. I'm always learning something new about someone's lived experience or someone's experience in the industry or working or how they deal with their employer or how they deal with being an entrepreneur. And that's really why I love it. We're really trying to think of how do we create this human condition and how do we change it into something that's, really, really, really our own. So I really find it fascinating.
yeah, yeah. And there's so many various disabilities to include when you're trying to make your content accessible. So I
Right.
think that's one of the main struggles people have, businesses have, when they're trying to incorporate accessibility best practices. But I just wanted to ask you, I got inspired to ask you this question because it's the tagline on LinkedIn. So, how do you help accessibility specialists become accessibility champions?
Well, I come from a consulting background. And I think that one of the things that we don't talk about enough in our industry is the fact that we're not usually trained like an electrician or a developer or a manager to become accessibility specialists within our organization. A lot of us, what happens is that, you may have a passion or an interest for helping people with disabilities, and then automatically you become the person who helps out with hiring and you become the person who comments on procurement or you become the person who convinces leadership to care about that ADA or AODA project or you become the person who knows all the screen readers, and it just is such an unfortunate way to approach the profession of trying to consult to an organization around how to make their digital properties or their physical properties or their hiring practices fully accessible. So that's where I come in. I am creating a coaching program around changing people who are passionate but don't really have much structure around what they're being asked to do, to improving communication skills, improving leadership skills, improving presentation skills, and things like that. And I think it's a disservice to the organizations that we're working for that we don't have the ability to say, no, I can't do that. Or, yes, I would love to do that. And let me show you how we can move that forward. So some of these softer skills that are so valuable to our industry are just not being taught, or we're not learning about them. So that's where I come in. So I want to change people who are knowledgeable and passionate and have some and who are just lacking structure in the way that they approach accessibility, into people who can confidently walk into a boardroom or on a Zoom call with 50 other people and say, here are the three things we're going to learn about today. Here are the three things we're going to talk about, and let's get started. So that's the journey I want to bring people along.
That's great. That's great. You mentioned ALDA. What does that stand for?
That's the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So up here in Canada, the laws are a little bit different. We have our largest and most populous province in Ontario had the accessibility laws before any other province did. So if you did business in the province of Ontario, which 99% of companies out there do, then they're going to have to adhere to the AODA. So people adhere to it to various degrees, of course, just like any other accessibility laws. And this is really put in place before the latest Accessible Canada Act, ACA, that's coming up in the near future as well.
Okay, so it's not that much of a difference between the ADA here and the ALDA. There's probably very minor differences.
Well, they both point to the same guidelines, right? Everything's pointing towards the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The only thing is that in AODA, they actually stipulate things like fines or financial impacts that will happen to organizations that do not comply. Now, there hasn't been any AODA complaint made actually to the government where change has come into effect, which is the opposite of what's happened down to our neighbors in the South, right? In the US, people make ADA complaints and then legal ramifications come from that. So it's just a little bit different. We talk about the fines in the AODA, and people make judgment calls, and if they're going to follow it based on that. Whereas in the US, it's the opposite way. So people will go and sue companies or create litigation against them for that.
Yeah, we're pretty there's starting to be more complaints against websites now.
Right.
I think it's sending the message that, you need to have access. And when that happens, when people with disabilities make complaints, that's the way that they hear us. So if you don't
Absolutely.
say anything, like, I wonder why in Canada it's a little bit different, that you haven't had any complaints up there. And I find that interesting.
Well, I'm not sure it's any better or worse. It's probably just a different approach to it as well. I mean, any organization that has some regulatory aspect to it, so banking, transportation, or the insurance sectors, that's going to be federally regulated by the government. So therefore, they must comply. So a lot of those industries are already making big changes now to make sure that they comply with accessibility guidelines. Smaller organizations probably don't, but when we're talking about the largest organizations, people just tend to follow what they do, in my experience. So if the banks are changing to be accessible, then smaller companies are changing to be made accessible as well.
Yeah, you work for a bank right now. You're working on making it Canada's most accessible bank, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think there'll be any time in the future that, far future, I guess, that you won't need to have accessibility specialists?
Well, I don't really think so. And I mean, what we are trying to do is work ourselves out of a job. I mean, in the ideal scenario, we wouldn't be needed at organizations at all. But that's like saying that we don't need diversity coaches to make sure that our hiring practices include people of all races and genders, or even other things like, if you think about technology, that means we, like, in the best scenarios, we no longer need cybersecurity experts either, right? Our technology will never have penetration. that we'll never have hackers attack our systems. But that's just not the reality of the world, is it? Right? We're always going to be falling upon our biases. And so therefore, we're needed. Accessibility specialists, accessibility consultants are required in organizations. They can take many forms, though. I mean, other than having a specialized role in accessibility, which is one way of doing it, they could maybe be part of an employee resource group, an ERG, that has many people who are passionate about accessibility as well, and can be drawn on for their, based on whatever specialty that they need to consult on or things like that. It can take many different forms, but no, I don't think this is a role that will ultimately go away, because to make large projects fully accessible is hard. It's hard. It's hard for the average developer to know how to make something fully accessible, and that's where people like us step in.
Now that brings up another question about the work of web developers. Do you think when they get training in their field that they should be required to learn how to incorporate accessibility, or should that be totally the responsibility of accessibility specialists or consultants?
Well, developers are just one piece of the pie, right? I mean, any kind of launch or any kind of uh, software development life cycle, every step of the way, right? The Scrum Master needs to know a little bit about accessibility. The designer does as well. Anyone who's doing user research needs to know. Content creators need to know. Developers, of course, need to know, and so do testers. Everyone needs to have a role. I think our industry over prioritizes the role of developers in making things accessible, because if you're handed a really bad design, it doesn't matter. You can't develop your way out of a bad like a bad design. Like, you can't do it. It's not possible. And a designer may say, well, the requirements were given to us by the business leads, and so where do leaderships and stakeholders, where do they fit in this large making things accessible? So in short, I'm not sure if I think we put too much reliance on developers to make things accessible. And so and a lot of accessibility specialists or consultants don't have a developer background. They're coming in from a different area, a designer
Right.
background, or even a tester background. And lots of testers who moved into the world of accessibility consulting, and they're very successful at it. So no, I think that developers need to be told how to make good and clean code, right? Because good and clean code will be accessible by nature. And if we focus on there, if we have our dev leads who may not know about accessibility at the beginning, if we have them focus on, when you look at the pull request, if you see inside the code that it's done poorly, stop the developer. Teach them how to do it properly. Teach them how to create good, clean code, and that will by nature be accessible. And then go back to your code component library to fix some of those common components there. I mean, we put a lot of effort on alt text, which is something that's important, but it's not the most important. I'm thinking buttons could be made even more important than that. So I want to say it's everyone's responsibility to make something accessible. It cannot just be relied on. It can't just be the developers who are expected to do everything.
Yeah, I was thinking that's shows that a common misconception that people have out of the weight of the responsibility of adding accessibility is placed on developers. Is that a common misconception? Because I was thinking the same thing. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
that's because we put so much reliance on the accessibility
yeah,
guidelines, and that's really a compliance check mark, right? Whereas what we need to focus on is organizational transformation, from the leader all the way down to the call center agent. If the call center agent doesn't know how to pick up the phone and talk to somebody who's on a relay service, then how are you going to create a sustainable client base who has disabilities? Or if the leadership isn't willing to fund resource groups or hire speakers or bring on coaching to teach people about diversity, equity, and inclusion, then how is that creating a sustainable workforce who will consider people who look different from themselves, right? So it has to be a full organizational transformation, but it doesn't have to be all at once. I think that's also a common misconception. People think that, oh, I'll pay $39 for some training and that's it. Then we'll all be fully accessible. No. It has to start from a grassroots movement, and also has to start from leadership downwards.
right. So I wanted to ask you this question. You asked this of on your show last week of Iman Ramari's Doster. You asked her about why is accessibility important.
So I love this question because I love the answers that I get from it on my show. And I have a very simple reason to why I think that accessibility is important. And I'm not going to go into like leadership, or I'm not going to go into something like that. I think it's offensive that in 2023 that somebody would have a problem accessing their bank account, right? How is it that the bank account that they're using, they can't transfer money without asking somebody to help them? I think that's offensive. I think it's offensive that somebody can't go and order a coffee without needing to order ahead of time because maybe this is the person behind the counter won't be able to hear them or won't be able to interact with them. I think that it's offensive that I can't, tell my friend to get an Uber to get to a destination without that Uber driver saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm allergic to dogs. I can't take your service animal with me." I think that's offensive. We have so much discussion right now in our world about how do we make inclusive workplaces, inclusive societies. But if we're not even able to, and we have all the technology available to us, if we're not able to get the surroundings, the technology, the bank, all that stuff usable by as many people as possible, I think that we're headed in the wrong direction. So the reason I think that accessibility is important is because it's 2023 and we just have to all get on board.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. It's really annoying. I had to get an Uber when I flew into California from New Mexico, and I had to get an Uber. But for me, I was expecting some kind of barrier. I'm always expecting some kind of barrier when I'm getting have any contact with public services. I
Mm-hmm.
expect a barrier. And so when there's no barrier and it's actually easy, I'm really happy about that. Like
Right, right.
Uber's all on the phone, order the service on your phone, don't have to talk. And but imagine if you're in a wheelchair or have some kind of physical disability and maybe the Uber driver isn't very understanding or wants to help you or
Right.
there's so many different barriers to consider. And so, yeah, it is really offensive in 2023 that we're still having so many barriers to accessibility. That's so true. And yeah, I feel like sometimes it's just shouting into the voice, when trying to get
Right,
people to
right.
listen. But ultimately, what convinces a company, let's say a company has no idea where to start, that's where you come in, right?
Right, exactly. And
Mhm.
that's I think where we all have to come in. And I when I talk about accessibility, I usually come from the part of how do we make this so approachable, so simple and easy for it to be a no-brainer. And if we can get to that part, if we can get to that point where I'm not sure, like a VP of hiring just says, "Oh, you mean all I need to do is change the copy of the hiring process," right? Usually there's templates. Think of hiring someone to be a copy editor, right? Someone like that.
Mhm.
And a hiring manager, all they need to do is just tweak some of the words, make it accessible, simplify the language, attract the best talent, even if someone has a disability, right? If we make it so simple, so that that hiring manager says, "That's all I need to do to to hire better talent," then that's a win, right? That's a win if we can break something down like that. And that's where really I want to focus my efforts. I want to make something so simple, and I want to make disability so approachable that it's hard to say no. And I think that's all part of kind of what we're missing and lacking. Going back to the earlier in this conversation, if we can coach people to help simplify disabilities, right? We talked about it already. The accessibility guidelines, that's what we throw at people. We say, "Oh, you want to make something accessible? Here's 55 guidelines that you need to check mark." And then they say, "I don't understand this. Like, how do I do this?" Instead, if you just went to a developer and say, "You know what's going to make your stuff a lot more usable is if you just label the buttons." And that's it. You just start with labeling buttons. If you can convince every developer there, and usually the teams aren't that large, depending on the size of the organization. If you can just convince every developer to put labels on buttons, that's a win. That's a win. Then you can show them, hey, that wasn't so hard, was it? So if it's not so hard for that, now let's talk about something a little bit more complex. Now let's talk about something a little bit more interesting, and we can talk about how to make something usable and accessible in that conversation. So that's how I like to approach it.
Yeah. So was it hard for you in the beginning when you started doing this consulting to like
Well, of
simplify
course.
it enough so the teams could understand you?
Yeah, of course.
Was it more
And
like,
what we're trying to do is take something that's ambiguous and nebulous that a lot of people don't understand or talk about. I mean, I'm not I'm not sure about you, but a lot of people, right? We are not told how to talk about disabilities as you're growing up, right? Your parents, your the educators when you were young, they didn't say, "Hey, before you meet someone who's blind, you have to say, 'Can I shake your hand?'" They don't say that when you're speaking to someone who has hearing impairment or deaf, you don't need to speak louder. It doesn't help. That doesn't benefit anyone by shouting in someone's ear. Instead, we're told to ignore and we're told to avoid. And I think that's where a lot of the root of the problems come from. So we enter the workplace. HR departments don't talk about accessibility. They don't talk about disabilities. And then when we see, something, a sign up in our workplaces that says, this is a scent-free workplace, please don't wear perfumes, we say, well, that's really silly. I can't believe that's up here. Where no, we're talking about maybe somebody having a disability that will cause them to have a anaphylactic shock, right? They'll maybe start to, or their skin will break out in hives. These are real situations. So if we were to think of how do we get this as early on as possible, how do we start talking about this in a way that's not, oh, that's weird. Instead, we'd say things like, this is the world it is. This is the world how we are, and these are real people. So I think that's where this all comes down to. So when I think of how can we make this approachable, how can I shine the light and talk to people about being people first, that really starts to break down this stigma. It starts to make things simpler for people to understand. And I think that's where we need to start, like really showing and reminding people that we're all people, right? We're all people.
yeah, and I think also when parents have children that are able-bodied and have no disabilities, and when their children see people with disabilities, they kind of learn how to deal with it, how to approach someone with this disability. I've always had kids come up to me and say, "Why do you talk funny?"
Mm-hmm.
Or "What are those things in your ears?" They're curious, and if you tell them, oh, they learn on their own. If they see someone with a disability or
Right.
someone who's blind or has a cane, oh, why do you have a cane? I mean, that's what I love about children, and that's how they learn also. But the responsibility is on parents and schools, and that's something they should teach children in schools about people with different disabilities. So I think we all have a responsibility in that aspect.
Absolutely. And I think as well that we forget that by just asking a simple question, that we can probably get the answer to how do I best, interact with you, and it's not coming from a place of judgment. It's just asking the question. I have a friend who's blind who always says, Cam, you always tell me what hand that you're going to be giving me my coffee in, and I appreciate it. And that to me was just, that obviously if I'm on your left hand side, I'm going to try and give it to you. I say, I've got your coffee here on your left. And I just need to say that one word. But that came from me just asking the question and learning a little bit more about it. And if you're wondering about it, just ask. It's easy because just like what you said, children are already conditioned to start asking those questions, to be curious about the world with no filter. And then it's the parents or the educators who say, don't say that. You might offend someone by wondering what those things are in their ears or why they talk funny,
Yeah.
right? And now I wouldn't encourage adults to go ask other adults, like, why do you talk funny? Maybe take a bit more, maybe ask that. But but asking the question, I think I did even before we started the show, how do you or do you lip read or do you see captions? And then that you were able to give me that answer. Just being curious, simply curious about somebody else, I think is, adds a lot of human touch to this.
Yeah. Yeah. What's offensive that I've encountered is when people see it as a mistake, the disability
Right.
as a mistake. Like I came across a man in the dog park a couple of years ago, and he said, "I'm so sorry. Can I pray over you?" Because we were talking, he realized I was deaf, and he said, "I'm so sorry. Can I pray over you? Can I lay my hand on your shoulder and pray over you?" And he caught me in a good mood, so I said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And because otherwise I would have been kind of bitchy about it. I know. I said, "Okay, go ahead." And he said a prayer. I have no idea what he said, but it was some kind of prayer.
Oh man.
But yeah, that was kind of strange. But it just goes to show that people still have this view that if you born with a disability, then you're a mistake.
Right.
It's
Right.
like babies who have Down syndrome, people see them as a mistake, but they're
Hmm.
human just like me and you. They're different.
Right.
Different
Right.
is not
Exactly.
necessarily a bad thing.
Hmm.
It's just different. So
Yeah, and we can get really deep into that conversation. I have a friend who talks
yeah,
about how, if you even look at in the Bible, and I haven't read the Bible or but if you look in the Bible, they even talk about how this is a mistake and throw stones at them and it's there's people who are different. And when we look at how we've been trained our entire lives, and I'm not sure this gentleman who said he wanted to pray for you, why he said that, right? But you have to think of what did he grow up in and where did he grow from. But it's not a mistake, it's not a problem. We're just all different, and that's okay. We're just all different, and that's okay.
yeah. I have no idea where he came from without thinking, but I didn't bother to ask him. I just let him, and then he left after that.
Right.
Just okay, bye. And that was it. Bye. So, anyway, on to the next question. That was very enlightening talking about that,
I agree,
how
yeah.
to approach accessibility. So, my next question is it's tough knowing where to start when you don't have a clue how to incorporate accessibility. Like for content creators on LinkedIn, I'm going to talk specifically about them
Sure.
because you've already talked about companies that you consult for. What is your approach to introducing accessibility best practices so that people don't feel overwhelmed or
Mm.
intimidated?
First thing I want to mention is don't accuse anybody, right? We all come from a different point of view, and a lot of content creators are doing this on their side or they're doing this just for fun. And so, not accusing them, not shaming them. I think that's a really negative direction that our industry sometimes leans on. It's let's shame and blame this person until they do it the right way. I've reached out to content creators before who use, have you ever seen those fancy fonts on LinkedIn? They look all like, you have
Yeah,
cursive or things like that.
yeah,
Just so anyone who's listening knows, screen readers and other assistive devices, assistive technologies cannot read those fonts. So if you have it in your profile, if you use them on your posts or things like that, they're unusable. So take them out if you can. But I've reached out to content creators who've used those before and I said, hey, just so you know, just so you know, you're excluding a certain population in your post by them not being able to read this. And I've had some content creators say, I didn't even know that. Thanks so much. I'll change that. I've had others who said, I'm aware of that and I choose not to change it. Okay. And then I have others who don't even respond. But by and large, the responses are positive. People say, I had no idea. And if we approach every situation like that, whereas most people who are creating content on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, they don't even know. They are not even aware that this is wrong. Same thing with using camel case hashtags. Camel case being capitalizing the first letter of every word in your hashtag. Okay, a lot of people just don't know that a screen reader will try to mush up all those letters together and make a word out of it that's incoherent and doesn't make any sense. People just don't know. So going to them and saying, hey, did you know you can increase your reach? I know you probably care about organic growth in your social posts. If you just did this, if you just did this one thing, you can make a change. And usually people are quite receptive to that because content creators want that organic growth. They want the growth of their account. So if you educate them on how to be more inclusive or how to change their posts, just tweak them in certain ways, then they can do that. And look, we haven't even talked about alt text. We haven't even talked about simplifying language. We haven't even talked about, making sure the colors on the graphics are more accessible. None of that stuff. So just approaching people and saying, hey, did you know that there's some things that you can improve your reach for? I found that to be quite receptive, and people are quite receptive to that type of feedback.
Yes, definitely. Most people have been really positive. Do you think it's better to comment on the post or get in touch with them privately?
I
Through DM?
always try to get in contact with people privately first because,
Yeah.
again, going back to that shame and blame, it just doesn't work. And it's so easy for people just to delete a post or a comment if they don't like what you just said. No one wants to be called out in public. And in fact, that's one thing. When you go through like a management training course, they say never correct someone in public. If you had an employee or if you had someone that you want to work with, you would never shame them in public in front of other people to call them out on something they did wrong. That's just bad practice. Much better to pull someone aside and tell them in confidence, or just message someone privately and say, you can improve your posts by doing this. And there's some people who don't react and so who don't respond or who don't correct it. Okay, that's fine. I just won't do business with them, or I won't affiliate myself with them later on. Maybe I'll unfollow their account. Because as they say, if you don't like a post, you don't need to comment on it. You can just unfollow that account and make it really easy for yourself like that.
Well, have you noticed that in the DMs now there's two sections? One is focused and the other is other. So maybe they missed your DM. There's
They could. I, for some reason, don't have that feature turned on. I'm not sure why. Maybe LinkedIn hasn't given me
oh,
that
it's just
feature.
showed
I know
up.
people. Oh yeah, I should try and see if I can turn it on because, yeah, that could be as well. If you're not in the focused area, but I would just think that people are just likely, if they don't understand, then they're probably just ignoring you. And I'm not sure. I just wouldn't approach it from a comment point of view anyway.
Yeah, I understand that. I pointed it out in the comments before, and they usually respond positively. They don't
Hmm,
know there's a thing, if you point
right,
something out to them, or like captioning videos.
right.
There's so many captioning apps nowadays. They don't even know where to start. Which app is better? For me, I only use one app, Mixed Caption, on
Oh
my
yeah.
iPhone, um,
I use
because there's
Descript.
too many.
I love
Oh,
Descript.
okay,
I can't
yeah,
say enough good things about them. And in fact, I've reached out to the company to say hello to them as well. Their support is fantastic. So I vote Descript.
yeah, yeah. The script is great.
Hmm.
So, but if you're just doing video, and I just point them to Mixed Captions, I
Yep.
should be an affiliate for them because I talk about them so much. I love Mixed Captions, but I am
Yeah.
using desktop as to maybe Subly or what's the other popular one?
There's
What's
CapCut.
the CapCut. Yeah, I haven't checked that out yet. Have
CapCut's
you?
one. Yeah, I use CapCut. If I need to just do some quick video edits on my phone, I use CapCut.
Oh,
But by and large, I'm going to bring things onto my computer when I can, just because it's just such a better experience if I can.
yeah.
And I think a lot of creators are doing that as well, especially on LinkedIn. If you're focused more on YouTube Shorts or TikTok, then you will do all your edits
Mhm.
within your phone. But what's funny is I'm finding that a lot of video editors have poor caption support, and then caption applications have poor video editing support. So no matter what, you've got to have two applications, and I think that
Oh,
that's
really?
a bit tedious.
That's
Yeah,
odd. That's interesting.
yeah.
But Yeah, about captions. The problem now is that if you're on Instagram and TikTok has great automatic captions, and I'm
Yep.
so happy they do it right. But Instagram, the captions are terrible. People add their brand colors to Instagram captions, and you know how they just show one or two or three words at a time on the
Sure.
screen, and that is really annoying. And a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
are doing that and putting it on LinkedIn also. So that's something to point out to people, I think, privately.
Right.
Privately.
Well, what do you think of those fancy captions where the captions are all animated and getting big and small, and they're called dynamic captions, I think. What do you think of those?
I hate them. I
Oh
hate them.
yeah.
And I don't have vision, any problem with vision, but they're really annoying.
Yeah.
It detracts from the message. You
Mm.
know, I mean, they're right now. YouTube has great automatic captions.
Oh yeah. YouTube has great
I
automatic
mean, you
captions.
have to edit them, but they're the way they're meant to be, black background, and
Right.
they're not. Someone recently said on LinkedIn that um, the right captions are ugly. They're not nice to look at, but that's not really the point.
Right. Right. Right.
They're functional. They're functional. They're not meant to be part of your branding at all.
Right.
It's a
Right.
totally separate thing. Don't add it to your branding. So
Yeah, it's such a fine line between that. I think that there
yeah,
we need to prioritize legibility and we need to prioritize function over design for things like that. And that's something. If I add captions now, all I'll do is add maybe a very slight color change around the single
yeah,
word that I'm
yeah,
speaking. I
yeah.
feel that that's appropriate. It doesn't take away from the background. It's legibility. In fact, I find that a lot of people, it helps
Mhm.
it helps them follow. I can speak quite fast sometimes, or if my guest is speaking fast, it can help people follow along as they're reading. But more than that, I don't like to see the fonts grow and get all different sizes, add emojis and all these kinds of things
Yeah,
to the captions.
yeah. Um, I see it more as people see captions and something to play with.
Right.
But it fulfills the two needs that people have. Now, even hearing people use captions, I hear all the time that they use captions too.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's
I
something.
use them all the time. My wife,
Yeah,
her first language isn't English, so we always have captions on at home. In fact, now it's weird that if I watch a show with no captions. So the
yeah.
best ones are the applications that add both Chinese and English captions, and so it's really the best of all the worlds in that case.
Oh, your wife speaks Chinese?
Right, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So some
Is
of
that
her
how
websites will have dual captions on them, and so we get to enjoy both.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah.
You said that your wife is expecting. When is she due?
June.
June. Oh, she's going to be a summer baby.
That's
They
right.
are
That's
going to be a summer babies. You don't know the gender.
right.
You
Not
don't know
yet.
the
Next
gender
week.
of the
Next
baby.
week we
Yeah.
will. Next week we will.
Oh, so you want to know beforehand?
I think
Beforehand.
so. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Too practical. I need to know, I need to plan,
Yeah.
I need to get everything ready. Yeah, no surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. I would like the surprise, I think. I don't have children, but I would prefer to be surprised. No.
we uh we were out with some friends yesterday and they were trying to encourage us to do the same thing. Do we want to get the cake that inside is
Oh.
blue or pink, or do you want to get the balloon that when you pop it pops out with blue confetti or pink confetti? And I said, none of, we both agreed none of that stuff. We just wanted we just want it simple. Let's just find out next week and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny that they have those gender reveal parties now. I love
Right,
it.
right.
It's a whole thing now.
Yeah.
So,
And they're expensive. To order a cake that has either pink or blue inside is an extra,
oh,
15,
really?
$20 or something like that. I'm saying that's just silly.
Yeah,
Not that
that is.
anyone, hold on, hold on. Not that anyone who does it is silly. No, I'm not saying that's, but for us and for me, it's not the right thing.
Oh, that's funny. Wow. Yeah. It's a thing now. It's a trend.
Yeah.
Well, my next question for you is you talk about driving the disability inclusion revolution. What does this mean, and how does it tie in with accessibility?
All right. So I think it's important to note, like, what's the difference between, like, what is accessibility versus like disability inclusion, right? Like, I think there's, to me, in my mind, there's a very distinct separation there. Accessibility truly comes to me from the word access and, the technical reason. How do we make this work with that? How do we get somebody with a disability to use this technology, and really, or how is someone in a wheelchair able to open the door to the condo, or the button to enter? Like, it's a very practical way of applying something, right? Like a ramp to enter a door, something like that. Whereas disability inclusion talks much more for, come on, everyone's invited to the table and we can all have a human conversation about what it is to have a lived experience, or how would you like to approach the situation, or how would you like to enter this building. So I always feel like the disability inclusion is much more about including people with disabilities into a conversation. Like I said, inviting to the table. So there's a shift in my mind of that happened when I was starting in the world of development. So you said the story about me having to fix a 6,000 accessibility defects, which were in a backlog when I just started my journey into development. That's accessibility work. That is truly, I am technically making something usable. But it wasn't until I met my friend who's blind, when I learned how to shake his hand, saying that story of hey, hi, Tom, my name's Cam. Can I shake your hand? That is disability inclusion. That is about how do we get people together to have that conversation. That is how we create a better experience for people who are different than us. So that's the charge I want to lead, because I think that if we focus on disability inclusion first, then by nature, accessibility will happen afterwards. It's easier to have the conversation about accessibility if you've already included people with disabilities in your requirements, or in your work, or in your process, or things like that. So to me, that's where I want to focus my efforts on, bringing more people to the table to have those enlightening conversations.
Yeah, I think everyone could benefit from that in school and college classes. It can be part of the what was that? General elective. What
Mm-hmm.
was that we had? Those
Yeah,
general
general
courses
electives. Yeah,
you
yeah,
take in college.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
like um, a requirement in college or
Right,
even
right.
in high school.
Didn't I
Uh,
hear, though, speaking of general electives, that American Sign Language, ASL, is the fastest growing language at schools recently? I think I read that, and more people are taking
they
ASL
are.
classes than ever before. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if it's the fastest growing language, but I know more people are taking ASL. And the
right,
problem, that brings up another problem, Cam, is that hearing people are teaching ASL. And
right.
I don't think that's appropriate unless
Mm,
you're CODA and you grew up with deaf parents. If you're a
right.
child with deaf adults and you're hearing, I think that's fine. But if you're a hearing person that learned ASL and you don't have a deaf member at home and you just learned it on your own and then you're teaching it, I think that's wrong. That's
Yeah,
just wrong.
I agree, and I think it's part of, maybe to some listeners, they don't know there's capital D deaf and then lowercase d deaf.
Mhm,
I only know from reading about it. I'm not part of the capital D deaf
mhm.
community, and so that if I don't identify as part of that community, why am I teaching? It's like me going out and teaching Chinese. It really is. Am I a native speaker? Am I part of the community? Then why am I out there trying to teach something that I'm only learning by association? I agree with you as well. Coda, but where do we find the other interpreters? I think that's a really interesting conversation to have as well. Where do you find people who have the knowledge and the skill? Because there's a shortage right now, if I read correctly, right? There's a shortage of ASL
Yeah,
interpreters out
yes,
there at the moment.
yeah. There's people on Instagram, deaf people on Instagram who teach ASL,
Mm,
and also on TikTok also.
yep, yep.
So, but they get the least amount of engagement. But yet the hearing people teaching ASL are getting a lot of engagement, and they're teaching the wrong signs. This is the problem with hearing people who don't know sign language intimately. It's
Right.
that they will teach you the wrong signs, and
Absolutely.
you're better off learning from a deaf person who's using ASL. Like
Yep.
me, I'm deaf, but I didn't grow up using ASL, and I wouldn't be qualified to teach it.
Right.
I
Right.
just take some courses and get trained. I mean, I have the facility for it. I do sign it, but I'm not fluent.
Right. Right.
And I'm behind with the times anyway. I mean, there's always new signs coming out.
Right.
Um, but I
But see,
learned so much from TikTok signs. There's different signs, slang signs.
yep.
I wouldn't feel comfortable teaching it myself
Yeah,
unless
I've always
it's
felt that we forget that, or as hearing people, we forget that it's a language. It's a language.
yeah,
It's not just moving their hands to communicate. It's its own separate language that
right,
people speak. People are native speakers. People who choose to only speak ASL, and I say speak very liberally. Like communicate via ASL. It's really being part of the community is such a big part of ASL as well. I'm sure many listeners have watched the movie Coda as well, and you can see in there people who are part of the community and who understand it natively. So you're absolutely right. I think it's um, to anyone who is trying to teach ASL online and who you're saying is part of the deaf community, they get the least amount of likes. Unfortunately, the algorithm, it's not blocking one person versus the other. It's just the people who learn some of these signs, they've got the
all right,
hook. They
right.
understand how to get the views and the attraction. Maybe that's just something that we all need to learn about a little bit
Yeah,
more. How do we use that algorithm to our advantage?
yes, yes. That's part of the problem also, is getting people's attention to get them excited about learning the language.
Right.
I think this one woman was teaching baby signs with her baby,
Uh-huh.
but they were more home signs and not official signs.
Okay. Okay.
So, so I don't know. But deaf people have been very patient about explaining in the videos why it's inappropriate
Mm.
to learn from someone who's not a native ASL speaker,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ASL user, not speaker. Um, so that's a whole other ball of twine. so, we have a couple of comments here. I don't know who this person is. I think it's Aditya because I'm looking here at.
He said
Yes,
bonjour.
yeah,
That's great.
it's bonjour. It's bonjour, yeah. And Aditya, you are private here in the studio, but on LinkedIn your name shows up. I'm not sure what that is, but
I think it's if the account is set to
I don't know. It's
public
just
or private.
public. Oh, is
That's
that
on
what it
his
is?
account. Yeah, he if someone chooses to stay as a private account, then they're going to show up as like this. But thank you, thank you. Yeah, new studio. It's great. I
Yeah,
was moved down to the
it's
basement.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How long did it take you to put up that paneling in the
Oh,
background?
this stuff is Home Depot stick peel and stick
Yeah.
wallpaper. It's great. It transformed the space. It was I think
It's wallpaper?
that's wallpaper. Yep,
That
$70
is wallpaper? Oh, I
covered
would
the
not
wall.
have
That's
guessed
right.
that. It looks so
Yeah, yeah,
wood.
yeah, yeah. It's
That
great. I loved it. I
is
loved it.
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks really cool. So Graham says she hates dynamic captions as well. Yeah, it's very distracting, Graham,
Yeah.
and yeah,
I feel you're almost looking more at the animation than you are the message that's behind it. You know what I mean?
yes,
You're too busy looking at the impact of this fancy fonts and things like that
exactly,
than
exactly.
anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I figure if one person said that the captions are ugly, then that's one way of sprucing it up and making them look pretty, but that's
Right.
not the purpose. But
Right.
that's not the purpose of captions, right? So
That's right.
Cam, yeah.
Yeah.
So Cam, do you have any last words to say before we finish our call?
Sure. The one thing I'd like to remind everyone is that if you're in the role of trying to convince somebody to be accessible or convince someone to care about people with disabilities, just know that you're not alone. There's lots of people like us out there also trying to move that needle forward, but start small. And any win that you get, right? If you can convince one person to think about color contrast before they release a product or a project or things like that, that is a win. That's a win. You're not going to change, you know, all of Google in one day. You're just not going to do it. So understanding that any win, if you can convince one person to think about somebody other than themselves before they do something, then that's a win. And we need to celebrate those wins and not get so down on ourselves when someone doesn't listen to our comments or our feedback or our advice. Because burnout was one of the main topics of a conference that I went to this year about accessibility. And I was so sad to see that in my community, people are experiencing burnout. And I just have to say, no, you're already winning. You're already champions. Look at the wins that you've been able to move somebody from this, from 0 to 1. That's still an infinite, amount of progress that you've been able to do. Now, going from 1 to 2, you've doubled the amount of progress. That's still progress. Focus on the journey and the progress, not on the destination. Because the truth is, we're never going to get to fully accessible. Even in the accessibility guidelines, there are contradictory guidelines from one to the other. How can we do this? The only thing we're going to be able to do is teach people how to think about people other than themselves and consider that while they're building or developing products or solutions. That's what I like to focus on.
Yes, I love that you said that. That it's really a long journey. You're not going to fix everything in one
Right.
point. So that's something to think about. You're in it for the long haul, really.
Right. I
Um,
like to tell people you have to think of yourself like a coach, like a money manager or a fitness coach or someone like that, someone who's trying to help somebody, do better. There,
yeah,
the pro, I played lots of badminton. So a pro badminton player still has a coach. No one has fully peaked in any, fitness or athlete journey. So why do we think we're any different? Why do we think that, I'm still learning, you're still learning about accessibility. We're still learning about this. We're here teaching other people about accessibility and inclusion. So we're still on the journey. You're still on the journey. We can all get there and teach other people how to think about this as well.
yeah. It's important that we are including everyone, and that makes people feel important. Because
Right.
if you're kind of like living on the fringes, if you don't have access. I mean, growing up, I didn't have access to TV, or I, I just played music a lot and I read a lot. So,
Yep.
but on TV, I had no access, and then other thing plays and things like that. So it's like saying, "Hey, you're important. We want you to be part of this community." So feeling included and it makes you feel better, and I think it does contribute to better mental health and physical
Absolutely.
health also.
Yep.
You feel included. So anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation with you this morning, Cam, and I hope you have a great holiday with your family. And I hope that when the baby comes, you will tell everybody, right? They can take a
Sure I will.
picture.
I'm sure I will. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not
thanks.
big about posting
So,
about myself, but yeah, I definitely will. I
I
definitely
know
will.
I did notice that. You do what you're comfortable with, but I
That's
would
right.
like
Yeah.
to. So I would like to see a picture of the baby. Everybody
Sure.
loves
Okay. I
babies,
promise. I
right?
promise.
Yeah. Yeah, if your wife is private, you don't have to take a picture of her. That's
That's
just
right. At least I'll include the baby in some of my videos. Maybe something like that would work.
yeah, yeah. This is your first child, Kim?
Second, actually.
Yeah, a second. Oh,
Yeah.
you've never taken photos of your first child.
Yeah.
How?
He's 8. I've got an 8-year-old, and this will be a whole new journey. I'm restarting the whole journey.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not. That's the same as my sister and my brother. They're
Oh
7
yeah.
years apart. And
Got it. Got it.
what's funny is that my sister, when my was 7, when my brother was born, right? She totally regressed. She didn't know how to get dressed anymore. She didn't know how to
Oh
put the
really?
socks and shoes on.
How interesting.
And she just, I can't put my clothes on. I said, what? You know how to get dressed. You know how to put your shoes on. So I'm sure that doesn't happen for every kid, but she totally dressed that way. It was interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah, yeah. That is interesting. So, everyone, I'm going to be taking the rest of the year off from doing LinkedIn Live, and I will be coming back January 3rd in the new year with Heather Neff, who is the founder of Equivalent Design, and you've had her on this show, Cam, Heather Neff, and she creates accessible graphics and SVG technologies. So be sure to join me in January 3rd in the new year. And in the meantime, have a great holiday, everyone, and Happy New Year. And I will see you in the new year. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Happy New Year.